Welcome to the BrettJohnson.biz podcast, where we discuss business on purpose, radically fresh leadership, capital that transforms society, and marketplace stories that embolden difference makers. Well, welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. It's a delight to be here with Shadi Awad. And Shadi, I got a surprise for you.
Okay.
You are our 200th podcast.
Whoa! That's amazing, Brett. Dude, it's awesome.
So that's a fun milestone, and it's
what do I
great
get? Do I get anything?
Yeah, you probably get a t-shirt.
Dude, I'm in. Listen, you may be joking, but I want that t-shirt now.
You want the t-shirt. Okay, great. Yeah, well, Shadi, it's great to have you with us. And just to give you some background, Shadi is the CEO and co-founder of Technagy I.T. It's an IT consulting firm. They do IT services for all sorts of businesses. Yep. And Shadi was not born in Texas. Shadi, where were you born? I don't know if I know anybody else who was born where you were born.
Well, I was born in Qatar, where the World Cup was, and but my roots, if you're not Qatari and your bloodline is not there, you're not really considered a Qatari.
Yeah.
But my roots, my dad was born in Jerusalem, and my mother was born in Bethlehem. I mean, my grandfather on my dad's side was born in Nazareth. I mean, my roots all over that region. So I'm a Syrian and I am Palestinian, both mixed there, and so that's where my roots come from.
Yeah.
But I don't sound like that. I sound, I go into the Middle East thinking I'm an Arab, but people see me as an American, an American Canadian. But yeah, so that's my roots.
Fascinating. And you also had some history back in terms of family living in a popular place right now, the Gaza Strip, right?
My goodness, man, I can't believe you're bringing up this topic. Let's go. My father was born in Jerusalem a year before Israel became a nation in 1947. Yeah. And my grandmother and my father moved into Gaza in 1948. And my father grew up in Gaza, the northern part of Gaza, just southeast of Gaza City and then northwest of Gaza City. And if you look at the maps, it's completely decimated, doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But I lived in Gaza from 1948 to 1967. He left during the 6-Day War and moved to Qatar.
And I remember the 6-Day War. I was young enough for that. I was in primary school, but I remember one of the reasons is because it had a small impact on us, because I believe the Israelis sunk a ship in the Suez Canal. And all of a sudden, we had all the traffic going past Cape Town, and they built out the harbor because that was the new trade route until the Suez. Yeah, so I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's quite amazing. Now, people might wonder, so was your dad and your grandmother Muslims then, if they lived in Gaza?
No,
I'm teeing you up here.
Yeah, exactly. Generations of Christians, generations. On my mom's side, from my great-grandmother's side, there's generations of priests and just always loved the Lord. I mean, always have been Christians in that region. I still got cousins and aunts and uncles that are in that region right now in the West Bank and Bethlehem and just outside of Bethlehem and Jerusalem area in the Arab areas.
Yeah.
So just generationally, it's always been Christian. Yeah. Wow. All generations. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to get into the Middle East conflict today.
Yeah,
I'd love to discuss it another time, but just it's a fascinating thing. Just when I heard your story, your rich family heritage, the believers living in Palestine among what today would be Palestinians, then Gaza, Bethlehem, and so forth, in areas that are just hotspots in the world. And so then you did a double migration, and migration is a huge trend in the world. But Shadi, your dad moved to Canada, is that correct?
Yeah, since my dad was born in Jerusalem and then lived in Gaza, his birth certificate throughout that time got lost in the shuffle. And if your bloodline is not Qatari, you're also not a citizen. So we flew into Buffalo, New York as refugees and had an immigration attorney waiting for us at the border in Canada.
Yeah.
And so we went across, and I was 4 years old at the time. And Canada said, we welcome you. And so they brought us in and we became Canadian citizens. And then I moved down to Texas, the country of Texas, as we call it, in the Dallas Fort Worth area in 2004 to finish my bachelor's and my master's in business at the time.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent.
Mhm.
And so before starting the business, you met Ange at some point, right?
I met Ange during school, and met her first year of college down here, and within 10 days, I knew I loved that woman, and then a year later, we were engaged, and then we were supposed to get married pretty quick, but I was doing my master's at the time, and I said, "Babe, I'm not going to get my master's done if we're always working on this wedding stuff." So she wasn't too happy, but we postponed the wedding a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, but she understood, and I finished my master's, and then we got married, like
Yeah.
literally a month after. So, and then
Yeah.
now, 5 kids, 16 years later, 5 kids. Oldest is 15, youngest is 5 years old. I
Yeah.
got one boy who's the oldest, and then 4 girls.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Crazy
Well, I'm the
time.
youngest of five kids, so I know how that goes a little bit. The
Oh, that's
youngest
cool.
one, the youngest one will be blamed for being spoiled most of their lives, but there we go. Yeah. Well, somebody once told me that when the Bible talks about children are like arrows in your quiver, that a quiver held five arrows. So you're doing well, Shadi.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It is a blessing.
Yeah. So it's great. So you met Ange, and
Mhm.
since then, it's an amazing story that she actually lived in a complex near you and would hear this guy singing and playing the guitar. She hears the guy playing a guitar and she thinks, man, I'm going to marry that singer.
Yeah, she's crazy, right? I mean, but I had a roommate also, is a friend of mine, and if he's gonna watch this, he's gonna love this. But I had a roommate that went on the balcony and he was singing. He has a raspy voice.
Yeah.
Uh, and she's like, another guy singing, he's doing worship music on the balcony in front of everybody. I'm surprised nobody threw something at him. But she had just rededicated her life to the Lord in a dramatic, the Lord had just had an encounter with her,
Yeah.
and she was like, I need community. And so she went out on her balcony and she yelled, "Hey, I hear you listen, singing Christian music, worship music. I'm trying to find a church and and all in that." So he invited her to the church, and we always used to have youth when we were younger in our early 20s at our house, and we would do worship nights and prayer nights and stuff like that. And she was there one day when I came back from Toronto, Canada, and we
Yeah.
spent all night with a whole bunch of people relaxing and having a good time. And then I pulled out my guitar and I played that song that she had heard. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the guy." And then she started coming over and making me pasta and different things like that. And I was like, "Done, checkmate." And then within a month and a half, we started dating.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the rest is history. It's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Now, I met Shadi at a Christian Economic Forum event, and
Yes.
which was great. That was last year out in Colorado, and we had conversations about things. And that conversation that we had mulled in Shadi's mind, and we're going to unpack that conversation a little bit. And so Shadi and I were talking about the topic of households, but let's unpack a little bit before then, Shadi, the
Yeah.
concept that um, here you are, you fast forward, you start a business
Yep.
after doing
That's right.
various things, and you've had your company going for quite a while now, right?
Yeah, 11 years.
11 years, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. So it's up, it's running, it's growing. And Shadi, unpack a bit for me because there's a typical tension where you've got various loves in your life. We've already heard about Ange, and so she's a love in your
Yeah, I
life.
think
You love God and you love your church and so forth, and you love your business.
yeah, I would say that from a young age, probably my late teens, early 20s, I've always heard the concept of marketplace ministry. And I didn't really, there was, I don't know, to me, I couldn't find the resources back then. We didn't have the internet, Brett. Like we couldn't just Google it. You had to know the people who knew about it, and so at the time, I just felt called to the marketplace. I was actually terrified of it at the beginning. It took me a couple months to accept it, and I just stepped into it. And And I just started going down that journey, but the journey wasn't what I would think. I finished my master's thinking I was going to conquer the world, and I ended up losing my job 6 months later and having to humble myself. And the Lord said, "Take your degree and shove it in a box."
Yeah.
And and then I got my first job as soon as we found out we're having Ephraim, my son. At the time, we were 1 year into our marriage, and started selling cell phones at the AT&T store. Anyways, not to make a long story short, I got poached into a voice over IP company, and then from that point, that fell apart. And then, but I had met my business partner at the time,
Mm.
and it wasn't one of those moments, Brendan, for like the younger listeners or anybody who has ever launched a business. Most of the time you hear you got to put a business plan together and kind of, no, we didn't do that. We were like trying to survive, and we heard of an opportunity to build a private cloud for one of the largest charities in the world, for the state of Texas, and we had relationships, so we jumped into that.
Yeah.
And we built the private cloud across 5 cities. We ended up having a moment where we're ready to go. We get Texas board approvals, and then Atlanta board approvals deny us, and they say, "Hey, you're too small." And a week before, 2 weeks before, my business partner was at a church service, and a pastor said, "Hey, somebody here, God's going to test you to see to see if you can handle what He has in store for you."
Mm.
And we ended up, he ended up calling me and telling me, "Hey, I heard this. Maybe this is for us." Then 2 weeks later, we get denied from this company where we had been living 3 families at the time on $8,000 a month. I had 3 kids at the time, and we racked up so much debt. And we're like, okay, this is it. And we ended up getting denied over there, and they said, "You're too small." But the person in Texas, I'm not going to mention names, said, "Hey, Shadi, if you can write that if you can write a letter that you have 500,000 in payroll, I can get you this deal."
Mm.
And I said, "Are you serious?" It's a Christian charity. I was like, "No, I can't believe this is happening." I remember the word that Sam told me about, and we came out of a previous company where we met that was smoke and mirrors. We didn't realize it was just a shady business. And I was like, we're not gonna lie about this. I said, "Sir, let me give you a call back." I called Sam. I said, "Sam, remember that word you got? This is what this organization is asking us to do. I mean, this is gonna be the easiest test we've ever passed. I'll call you
Yeah.
back." Click. I called the other guy back. I said, "Hey, if God wants to open the door, He'll open it. I'm not gonna lie to make it
Yeah.
happen." And the guy said, "Oh, you got 2 months. You got 2 months, and then we got to part ways." So we sat in our conference room, $500 in our bank account, and we said, "God, we've done it, and we're about to shut down the business. We don't know what we're going to do. We've racked up 50 grand of debt each in our mid 20s."
Yeah.
And we got to a point where we said, "Well, I've heard about this thing called Google Ads. Let's just sink the $500 in there and see if something happens." So we put a 20-mile radius. We put
Yeah.
the like words like IT outsourcing, then different
Yeah.
IT words. And we had our first call was 20 miles outside of the radius. And if you know
Oh, wow.
Google Ads, your ads show up here in the radius. That's what you're paying for. And it was an aerospace and defense company. And they said, "Do you do IT outsourcing?" We said, "We can do IT outsourcing." So we went over there. We pitched them. We've never done it before, but we pitched them a solution that was flat rate. We ended up closing that deal the day that this nonprofit's contract ended.
Yeah.
And we backed into the model that we're doing today, which is managed IT services for small and medium-sized businesses. And we ended up cutting our teeth. Reoccurring revenue in business allows you to have the runway to figure it out. If you got to sell a pair of socks 2,500 times a month, you got to
Yeah.
keep doing that. So that model was a gift from God. We didn't realize it, and we backed up in the model. And that CEO of that company, we
Yeah.
ended that 1 year contract, and we're so scared. We're right back at the same place. We're young punks, man. We didn't know what we're doing. And then we ended up saying, "Sir, we would like to just renew it for another year, the same thing, same
Yeah.
exact thing." He said, "I'm not signing a 1 year contract. I'm going to sign a 3 year contract with 15% price increases." And
Perfect.
then we ended that 3 years and signed a 5 year contract, and then they got acquired, and the rest is history. But during that time, I always tell people, if you want to know how much you trust God, start a business.
Yeah.
And I think that if I was working a job where I clocked in and out, I
Mm.
probably would not feel the pressure that I did feel.
Yeah.
And if you're running if you have a 3-inch pipe running a 2-inch flow of water, nothing, no problem. I was a 2-inch pipe running a 5-inch flow of water,
Yeah.
and all the cracks in my life were just coming out. And I could tell you stories, but I had fear of failing. I had fear of insignificance,
Mm.
and I could not delegate. I became a workaholic to the max.
Yeah.
And it came to a certain point where that business was consuming me, and Ange was so patient, but I had just turned to my vices. I had turned to, making excuses to work late. The
Mm.
A, B, C tasks, right? I was spending the late nights on C tasks that when A tasks came up, I needed to work late for real, and I had already used up that card. So eventually in 2018, it just ripped me apart. And my wife said, "Hey, you need to go find your own place." And it was a wake
Mm.
up call for me. And I realized if you were to ask me, "Hey, do you see you and your wife being together on mission and doing ministry together?" I would tell you, "No way. You're
Yeah.
going to do your part, your thing, and I'm going to do my thing, and we're going to divide and conquer." That moment shifted everything for me.
Mm.
Actually, my desire to want to do things with my wife
Mhm.
and to be on mission with my wife just became so great, and especially because I just felt so much love for her during that time, from her during that time.
Yeah.
So then we started like experiencing, a whole new world, especially with the Christian Economic Forum and different groups of people, different networks, kind of like a renaissance. I think like a renaissance around the whole marketplace ministry movement that's happening right now. The whole integration of faith and work. And the challenge though is I'm like, I got 5 kids. I got our church, God bless them, but I got all this stuff from church. My wife has got demands from church. And then I also have like my business. And now I'm now like when you go from like 2, 3 employees to about 25 employees now, you start dealing with people issues a lot more. And you can't ignore it anymore. Like it's like you got people that are struggling mental health, their marriages are struggling and things like that. And I thought to myself, man, I really feel this desire to make an impact back into the marketplace. And Ange and I were not in agreement,
Mm.
not from the standpoint that she didn't want to impact them, but I felt like my season at the church was shifting.
Yeah.
And still going to the church, still being part of a community, doing all those things, but I felt that the Lord was calling us to really become stewards of our company,
Mhm.
not only from the standpoint of you know resources, but the human capital too side, right? The making an impact there. So we were in a disagreement for a couple of years, just not on the same pace,
Yeah.
um, and we and essentially we had you and I. That's when I met you this year, January, at
Yeah.
the Oral Roberts Web3 Christians in Web3 conference.
Is that where we met first? We didn't meet
No, no,
last.
no. When we met at CEF, yes, we
Yeah.
met at Christian Economic Force, but we had that conversation over there.
That's when we had the conversation. Okay. So let's unpack that conversation because just to let listeners know, those who know me and know that I've talked about this before. In fact, Shadi asked me, "Have you told anybody else about this? Have you talked to anybody else about this?" And I'm like, "Shadi, I've taught about this for 20 years.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
but I thought, wow, and it's been part of our repurposing business training. It's something that we've covered with business leaders, and for them, it's really unlocked their hearts in regard to their business and given them a lot of freedom. And so, in fact, I've just released a new book on this, and I reference Shadi's story in there, so you guys can go and find it. And it's the topic of households, the power of households. So, Shadi, let's go into that conversation. How was it from your side? How did it go?
But right before that conference, right, probably a year before, one of my mentors told me to study the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
And he said, but don't study from the son side, study from the father side. And I said, oh, I don't think anybody's told me about this before. So I jump into the story and I see something. I mean, the father spent his whole energy in life building the wealth. He gives it up to his son. His son wastes it. And instead of being angry, he looks up at a distance, sees his son, and does 4 things. He goes ahead and tells the servant to kill the fatted calf,
Yeah.
runs to him, puts a robe on him, puts a
Yeah.
ring on his finger, puts sandal on his feet. And when I read that, I really felt like, whoa, like how come I never saw this before, Lord?
Mm.
And what I felt the Lord was telling me at the time was, man, the father was putting on a robe, identity, a
Yeah.
ring, restoring authority, and putting sandals back on his feet for direction and purpose.
Yeah.
But he also killed the fatted calf.
Yeah.
And the fatted calf typically was held for like royalty to come. Like if you didn't have anything, you had a fatted calf to kill, and you're gonna have some nice rice and goat or whatever you got, or lamb. And he actually killed the fatted calf for his son, which means that he saw his son as royalty. And the Lord said to me, the first stage of maturity is knowing that you need God, the prodigal
Yeah.
son. But
Yeah.
the second stage of maturity is to become the father in the story. And the
Yeah.
father begins to restore the authority, the identity, authority, and purpose in people's lives.
Mm.
And that shifted everything. That became my purpose. Like
Yeah.
that became it just became simple. If it does anything to restore those things in people's lives, I don't have to ask the Lord to do it. Go do it.
Yeah.
Go be an impact. So I was feeling this pull that we needed to do that for our team and like our employees and stuff like that. When we sat down, I was like, "Hey Brett," I text you and I said, "Hey, I see you're at this conference. I can't believe you're speaking. I'm going to be there. Can we sit down for dinner?"
Yeah.
And we sat down for dinner. I said, "Brett, I got a question for you. I need some advice." And I said, "Hey, like my wife and I are not on the same page right now. I feel like we need to step down from our small group because we don't have time. We're raising 5 kids, and I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and I feel the Lord's drawing us to the marketplace. But sometimes when I say things as husbands, it doesn't come across. And I'm sure they say that times 10 about us, right? Like they tell us stuff all the time. And this is when we started having the conversation. And you said, so how many households are in your small groups, in your small group? And I said, there's 7. And then that's when you said, I can't remember the number exactly, how many times in the Bible. Was it 130 times?
Yeah.
Right?
About 132. Yeah.
132 times you mentioned that it says that he and his household was saved.
Yeah.
And as an Arab myself, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
And you said, don't look at ministry as an individual thing. Look at it as households.
Yeah.
So, Shadi, you have 7 households you're managing, you're stewarding in your small group. How many households do you have in your business?
Yeah.
And I said, huh? like, how come nobody's ever asked? I mean, I don't know why. I know you've been talking about it for 20 years, but I said to myself, whoa, 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 hold on a second. And you turn to my friend Tyler and you go, Tyler, write this down. Shadi, how many employees you got? 25. How many customers? How many employees within their customers? How many vendors? How many community partners? We didn't even talk about social networks, by the way, Brett. I've
Yeah.
added that in the mix.
Yeah.
We wrote it down. We calculated it, and Tyler, you asked Tyler. You go, Tyler, how many? And there's like 3,000 households
Yeah.
directly connected to our company. And you said, Shadi, you're concerned about your 7 households, but one day God's going to say to you, what did you do with the 3,000 households that I've put in your stewardship?
Yeah.
And I was like, checkmate. Like it was done. And you turned to Tyler, and this is like the baddest move. This is the Brett Johnson move. You turned to Tyler and you said, Tyler, write this down. Shadi does not know his flock. And a dagger, it was like a joyful dagger. It was like it went in, but I was smiling. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I am one thing that keeps coming to me is that people who are in a place of ownership, like business owners, they are truly in a sacred position.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking they own the purse,
Mm.
they own the atmosphere,
Yeah.
they are in a holy position.
Yeah. They own the purpose often.
Yes. And the Lord can use us as entrepreneurs
Yeah.
to really make an impact in people's lives. So I went back to Ange and I shared the story with her. And she said, we got to do it. We got to make the shift. And it was hard because just people don't always understand the fact you're stepping down from small group leadership,
Yeah.
But I knew that, by the way, that's 3,000 households. That's like 10,000 people right there.
Yeah. So just
And
to set context, how many employees you have?
I have 25 employees.
So this is a typical ratio for people, just so people know. Yeah, you got about 25 employees. Yeah, impacting 10,000 people through 25 employees, that sort of ratio. That we talk about leverage, right? Oh, we want to get leverage in business and so forth. But the leverage of the household concept is unbelievable. And it was that way in the early days of the church. And you will know, coming out of an Arab family kind of thing, you get the dad, you get the main guy in the village, you get the mayor. In South Africa they call him the main man, what counts. You get in Nigeria they call him the big man.
Isn't that Mafuto?
Something like that.
I can't remember.
So you get that, and then it just has such an impact. But I love your numbers, 25 up to 10,000. I've had others where there might be 50 employees and the
Sure.
influence is 3,000. It depends on the type of
But
business.
but I
But
tell you, we started integrating the households that are directly connected to us on socials,
yeah,
and we're closer to about like 9,000 households.
yeah,
And one of the things that, I'm having a great conversation with my pastor about is like churches may be, whatever the number is, but if you were to, it's not just that. It's if you take a businessman and you add that connection to a church,
right.
you've got whatever the church size is plus 20,000 people.
Exactly.
And that stewardship
Mhm.
of the church to the businessman and how we can,
Yeah,
provide resources to businessmen and women to
yeah,
make an impact in the marketplace. Parachurch ministries are doing that very well.
yeah,
Faith Driven Entrepreneur, all those guys, yourself. But the church is, it's a new concept, and the churches shouldn't feel threatened about it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really increased. I had a radical example of that in Indonesia. We were teaching on convergence and husbands and wives doing things together. And the next day, this couple comes to me. She's looking miserable. He's looking excited. And so my friend, Dr. Jacob Estra, says, Brett, this couple has a problem. I said, what's the problem? And the guy is a pastor, and now he's heard me say husbands and wives need to do things together. So now he wants his wife to spend more time in his church. So I said, how many people do you have in your church? He said, 150. I said, how many of them are saved? Oh, they all know Jesus. Great. Then I said to her, what do you do? She said, I have two businesses. I have a hair salon and I've just opened a Japanese restaurant. I said, how many customers do you have in the hair salon? 450. So then, and then the restaurant is new. So then I'm like, okay. So then I say to the guy, look, every good church has a missions department. She's your missions department. And I said, the goal isn't to get her to do more stuff with your 150 people who all know Jesus already. But if you look at your household, just in simply, you've got 600 people. You've got 150, she's got 450. Then my next question was, who's got the bigger ministry? Now the guy's looking a bit sheepish, right? Well, he embraced the thing. Next thing, he's sweeping up hair in the hair salon instead of trying to drag, because he sees it now as part of their combined household, which is great. And if pastors thought about it this way, yeah, we've got the stuff we do in the church. And then what Shadi and the other business owners are doing, the university professors, the other people, it's an extension of us. And then all of a sudden, it's not within your four walls, but it's a much bigger concept. And it's really, really empowering. Otherwise, you feel you've got to spend all your time laying a guilt trip on people like yourself. And the more talented you are, I mean, you lead worship, you can do finance, you can do all of these things. The church wants you to help run the organization. But it's good when the pastors get it and they say, man, these guys are frontline and I'm supporting them in what they're doing.
I've often seen the church like a conveyor belt.
Yeah,
They're a massive pitcher of water, and this empty cup is flowing into the building,
yeah,
and they get filled, and then it goes out full.
yeah,
But churches I feel like are oftentimes big oases, and like
yeah,
come and sprawl out your chairs and do that stuff. And there is a beautiful aspect to the Christian community within churches.
yeah,
Um, but it's 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 interesting in the marketplace. I do think sometimes, hey, can you just do your job? Like just do your job. I don't want to deal with ministry stuff.
yeah,
I don't want to impact my employees. I just want you to do your job.
yeah,
The Lord goes, you know, like one of the things the Lord tells me is like, didn't I bring you those deals? Like, wasn't it me that opened up these opportunities? So do you remember that aerospace defense company I brought you? You
Yeah.
know, if it was in the radius of that Google ad shadow, you would have said Google's amazing. But because you would have said that, I did it outside the radius, and I
Yeah.
said, God, you truly are the provider,
Yeah.
and we are stewarding your resources.
Yeah.
And it's such an opportunity for the church and marketplace leaders.
Yeah. So, Shadi, let's go back. You've done some, firstly, the understanding of the concept frees you up to say, okay, man, I do need to minister inside my business. This is a legitimate sphere of influence. I've got to take care of it. I'll just mention him briefly is that a church planting is a model in people's mind, and it's quite successful. If you want to open up something, you're in Dallas, Fort Worth, and you want to open up, you do well, then you open up a branch in Austin or in Houston or wherever it might be. In the Old Testament and in the Hebrew mindset, I don't know if it's like this in the Arab mindset. The way you started a new synagogue was 10 business leaders got together or 10 heads of households, which formed a quorum. I mean, you can't have a funeral today without a quorum. You need the 10. The 10 is the quorum. When the 10 got together, then they appointed a rabbi, right? What we do is we send out a rabbi and his wife and a dog and 3 kids to go off and to start something in Austin or Houston or Africa. And we wonder why they get isolated, underfunded, and discouraged. When you have a critical mass of 10, then automatically your pastor, in that case a rabbi, is getting a tenth of the 10 and has a living wage, if you like. It's just built into the Old Testament model. And so if we think about households in the right way, it also creates replication and growth from a church planting perspective, not to mention that we should be planting churches in businesses. In other words, if we change our definition, we should say like every business can have an expression of the kingdom in it. Okay, but
Yes.
let's go fast forward. So you take that conversation, Angie's on board. Then what were some of the practical things that you did to say, okay, how do I? Brett told me I don't know the condition of my flock. The Bible says you got to know the condition of your flock. So then what did you do?
Yeah. So just a couple months before our conversation, you know, the whole story of the prodigal son had already been brewing, and the Lord's been saying, you know, just go ahead and become the father in the story. And we asked our team if they wanted to go to a marriage conference, and so we took a group of employees and their spouses to a marriage conference. And in one weekend, this is so big, okay? Because I've heard somebody talk before about the idea of God is in the business of collapsing time.
Hmm.
And and he said to me, you can go to a therapist for 18 months, but when you have an encounter with the Lord,
Yeah,
everything changes in that moment.
that's right.
So this idea of collapsing time has been really fascinating for me, especially from the standpoint of just being a present father or just being a present husband and just finding ways to become efficient. So we went to this marriage conference and we didn't know what we were going to expect, but we were just excited. Number one, we went to a marriage conference, Angie and I, which is a miracle, right? In the
Mhm.
midst of raising 5 kids. And number two, we actually were ministering in the marketplace. We were actually like being there for our team members and their spouses. And number three, we impacted the culture of our company.
Mm.
I mean, and God said to me, in one weekend, you've collapsed time, Shadi. There you go.
Yeah,
I said, wow. Like, and it was easy and it was fun.
yeah.
In that first marriage conference, we sat around a table and I had these questions that everybody was answering over dinner. And by the time we got to the third question or fourth question, the whole table, 80% of the table was crying and they're saying how much they need this.
Yeah,
And we have community in our churches, but a lot of these people don't have churches. They don't have
yeah.
relationship. So it was such an impactful time. That's one of the things we're doing.
Mm.
We just did it again just last month. We just took our team again to a marriage conference. It was really powerful. But
Mm.
I tell you, in January, it's such a timely topic. In January, there wasn't one day we weren't staffed fully from January to May,
Yeah.
and there was always something happening in somebody's life. Whether somebody's waking up with panic attacks, or somebody's waking up with, somebody's dealing with marriage issues. We had 3 couples dealing with really big marriage issues.
Mm.
I'm like, the Lord is just showing us, number one.
Yeah.
I think God is willing to work at our pace. I think that's what God's doing. He's working at our pace here, but
Mm.
He's showing us, hey, these are the needs. Don't be too caught up with this,
Yeah.
just going after the profits, but just start praying into that. So that's one thing we're doing. And out of this marriage conference, we've decided to put together a budget for a quarterly get together, all of our families,
Yeah.
and start and eventually separating out. Our goal is to separate that out into getting the men together and getting the women together to go out, and it's all budgeted out of the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that's the direction we're going right now. And
Yeah.
out of that, I think it'll emerge leaders and
Mm.
as we continue to grow the company. But that's in our direct impact of our employees
Mm.
on the other households. Let's just say the thousands of households. I've been, thinking like, how are we going to make an impact on that?
Let's
And
get to that in a second. Let me just ask,
okay,
come into two
sure.
things. People might think, oh no, this is like another thing to do if I have to take care of the people in my business, as well as all of my other commitments, my 5 kids and so forth. Uh, but actually, integration increases margin.
Yes.
So the collapsing of time thing, when you're not dealing with, here's my church over here, here's my business over here, here's my calling over here. When you're not dealing with that divergence and you get the underlying principle of integration, things overlap more and it creates more margin. It's very interesting how that happens.
Yes.
And so the devil will kind of say to us, oh yeah, but if you start caring for your people, your time's going to be gone. I mean, you got 25 employees, 10 minutes a day, boom, there's, 4 hours a day gone right there. And so if I care for them, it's going to be a problem. But the greater the integration, the more the collapsing of time, the greater
Yes.
the convergence, and it gives you more margin. So I just wanted to underline that, and just it's wonderful to see that happening with you guys.
So is that a question more on like the risk of it? Are you talking about the risk?
I think that's just the reality. I think the second point I would make from that is the first is actually going for the integration. It's not easy, but it does actually create margin if you embrace it. Second thing I would say is that it can feel like, I don't want to get overwhelmed with people's issues. It's like leave your problems at home and just come and do the job. That's the
So that's
business.
it.
That's sort of best practice is look, I once went into one of my bosses when I was working at Computer Sciences Corporation. He'd actually just been promoted sideways or just given a sideways shift. So he was on his way out. I walked into his office with a client issue. I sat down. I said, hey, Paul, I want to talk to you about something. He looked at me and he said, hey, Brett, you're confusing me with somebody who cares.
I kind of like
and
that guy. It's funny.
and we like to sometimes keep that armor on ourselves. Look. I care about your work performance, but I don't want to know about who ran over your dog or what happened with your kid and everything. But the concept of households, whether we understand it because of the heart of God, becoming a father, as you say, or accountability, God's going to hold me accountable for these 10,000 people times 20 years in business. Man, this is a big thing. Whichever way we understand it, it unlocks our heart towards our people. And we see things we've never seen before when we see our household. It almost legitimizes our care for everybody in the sphere of our business. And when I see that happen with business people, they become natural pastors to their people. They become prophets to their people, speaking about their careers, their future, their life, calling out their potential. They become the ones that teach them and grow them. And so that's a wonderful thing, is that the concept of household really just unlocks people's hearts.
100%. I I love one. We want to feel called by the Lord,
Yeah.
and it really is about stewarding, right? Like one, like the favor. I mean, if your business grows, you're doing something right. Hopefully, you're doing it the right way. As your team grows, I mean, it's just a symbol of more responsibility, and the idea that it could all be integrated and you don't have to burn at both ends.
Yeah.
You find yourself at a place where you're trying to do a million things for God. Robert Herjavec, the Herjavec group, he talks about you could be an inch deep and a mile wide, or an inch wide and a mile deep.
Yeah.
And I think the concept of marketplace leaders, and especially the demand and the pressure that's on them, and there are a few that really deleverage themselves very well. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. I got a lot of pressure on me.
Mm.
But the idea of collapsing time or finding efficiencies in our lives, that's a massive motivation to wanting to integrate faith and work in the marketplace.
Yeah. And
And
how's Ange feeling about the business now? And how's she seeing the ripple effects of her gifts and her heart and everything into I want to say, the wives and the lives of your people?
yeah, she's built relationship with all the ladies,
Mm.
and that's great. We feel on mission together.
Mm.
We are still dividing and conquering in some capacity,
Yeah.
but when we can converge on mission together, and it's a very clear thing, and it's backed by resources, and it's not always, but it's a continual flow of making an impact into people's lives in some capacity. But maybe it's an individual impact, maybe it's a group impact like the marriage conferences.
Yeah.
It brings us closer together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would remember before 2019, I would tell you this is never going to happen. Like we got to
Yeah.
divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Now it's as we're stepping into, I guess, the halftime
Mm.
section of our lives. Um, to be on mission is beautiful and an example to our kids as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I'll probably need to unpack this in another podcast, but you've mentioned resources a few times. You're putting company resources into a marriage conference or a quarterly gathering or a podcast. In fact, you were going to go down that road. So I'll come back to the resources point later. So for your immediate staff, you started doing things for your leaders, for your staff, for your broader household. I mean, it's fine to say 10,000 people, 9,000 people. What sort of things can you do to have some sort of influence in their lives, Shadi?
We started to think about that, and I've always, and podcast is such a trend, but I'm going to kind of give you the mechanisms behind it or the piping behind this whole strategy. But we've always wanted to do a podcast. One, we think longevity wise in the market, it's good to become a subject matter expert and to also bring vendors on and different experts. And so we launched a podcast. Our tagline in our business is called Empowering You. So
Mm.
we said, hey, well, that is right in line with becoming the father in the store. So let's go and let's figure out ways to bring content so we have CEO conversations. We bring our clients on. We bring other CEOs that have tremendous stories. We're doing industry experts and we're doing cybersecurity and IT insights, right? So we talk about topics and we bring in experts as well. What was really fascinating is you have the households across the social media platforms.
Right.
You also have, for us, all of our contacts, our vendors, all the business cards we gather from networking events. So what we've done is we've created silos, like groups of people, groups of households,
Mm-hmm.
and we've categorized them based off, potential content that would be curated to them. I'm not
Right.
sending, entrepreneurship stuff to an employee of a customer. And by the way, because we're IT, we have that information. Not
Right.
everybody always has that, but so what we've been doing is curating information out of the podcast that we're creating and disseminating that information out to people. We have one that's coming out around mental health, and it's going to touch all the households. It's not only just specifically entrepreneurs, because we're going to talk about the struggles that I've been through, the workaholism, all the depression I've been through around running a business and figuring out myself. And that's going to go to the CEOs. And
Yeah.
I know CEOs are struggling with that stuff. I
Yeah.
know it
Yeah.
for a fact. So we're taking a marketing approach and a strategic approach on how to steward even the information that we have and
Right.
disseminating that in a tasteful way and integrating that into our socials. Like it's not
Yeah.
always that, it's kind of like mixed up so it doesn't become just noise.
Yeah.
And we did an episode on a veteran that works with us that talked about suicide, and we had tens of thousands of views and
Yeah.
people making comments that are ex-military guys how much they've appreciated it. See, not
Mm,
only the households within our companies, but even across these social platforms is really amazing. So that's kind of what the direction we've went on our side,
mm,
outside of that.
mm. So I think there's no shortage of things that we can do. If you get the heart part, then you can add, you can start asking God, okay, God, so you've given me a heart for your people. Now, what can I do about this? What are their needs? Just like you would with customers. What does a customer need? You're not
That's
trying
right.
to sell the customer something they don't need. What do they need? What can I do practically to help them? Is there something that I can do practically? And then the situation again of just, okay, so that then opens opportunities. I mean, we had an interesting story. I'm not sure if I told you the story about the guy, single guy running a business, 50 employees in Jakarta. And he got a hold of this concept, and all of his employees were Muslims. And so he thought, well, these people are part of my household now. What can I do? And he came up with the idea of going to their houses and figuring out whether their bathrooms needed to be remodeled. Now, we never thought of that. I mean, there's nothing in our manual that says a Christian business owner remodels the toilets of
Love it.
their, but he had the heart. And so he went ahead and he said, no, he's going to do this. Well, we went to visit him a few years later. We were doing a follow-up, and my team is looking at our notes we have from the client, the scorecards and the strategies. And so they asked him, how's it going with the bathroom remodels? He said, I'm not doing them anymore. And the team was like, oh, it was a good story for a little while, but we'll have to scratch that story. We said, why not? He said, well, when I got to their houses, I saw the whole house was a mess. I'm doing whole houses. He said,
Can I make 2 points on this?
yeah,
So Salvation Army is an organization that we're very close to, and
yeah,
the former CFO of Salvation Army in Texas was my business partner's dad, and he shared a story one day about the mantra, the philosophy of Salvation Army, and I loved it. It carries to this point. He says the way we get to salvation is one way: soup, shower, salvation.
yeah,
And the idea of meeting people where they're at, and
yeah,
it does say that his kindness leads us to repentance. There's something there about loving people
yeah.
without strings attached. Like
Right.
people could sniff that out, right?
You're right.
They
Yeah.
could sniff that out. The second thing I was going to say to you, one of the things, and this is something your audience can think about, but asking the Lord if He wants to add a GL account on the
Yeah.
P&L.
Yeah.
So we've done that. We've said, God, we do sense that we need a budget for this. So, and
Right.
not to be caught off guard, but budget for it. And there's some people that we know, obviously, that are doing 50% of their profits are going right back out to people and dedicating 199% of their businesses to making an impact.
Yeah.
But even if you just start and think about in your annual planning about God's desires and integrating an impact to your team members and to your households, that's been pretty cool. And my business partner has been on board with that. And
Yeah.
we go back and forth and we ask the Lord, what do you want to do? And we felt even for this marriage conference this year, we felt the Lord say, all right, well, you had 14 people this time come. We want you to buy tickets for 28.
Right.
He said, I want you to buy tickets for 28. We did that. We said, okay, well, let's invest in that. We feel that strongly.
Yeah.
And next year we're gonna have 28 people, 14 households coming with us this marriage conference. And
Mm.
it's budgeted. It's already there.
That was the point I was going to go to. So we'll extend the podcast a little bit because it's an important one. The first hurdle you have to get over is I have to do my ministry inside a church, for example. So you get over that one and you say, now I'm doing my ministry inside the business, but what about the finances? Because the second hurdle can be, I need to give my tithe to my church. And there's a lot of teaching about tithing and other things. But in the book Kingdom Economics, I write about a generosity prism. There's many types of giving in scripture: tithes, offerings, special capital contributions, um, free will offerings, first fruits, gleanings. It's a whole culture of generosity. So how does business fit into this? Well, one day Lynn's showing me something in Deuteronomy chapter 14. I encourage people to go and read it because um, in the Christian narrative, I don't even want to say evangelical narrative, because in the Christian narrative, we told, bring your tithes to the storehouse. And that's true. That's what it says in Malachi. And then it says the rest of this is made up. The storehouse is where you get fed. You get fed at your local church, so bring your tithe to the local church. The first part of the equation is true. The rest of it is just conjecture, because actually the storehouse in the Old Testament was much bigger than your local church. It was dealing with education, healthcare, public works
Oh yeah.
projects, etc. So what did you do if you're a business? Well, Deuteronomy 14 says, Shadi, if Technagy makes money, what you do is, and this is putting it into today's language, you take 10% of your profit and you're going to go to the place that I'm going to show you, which is going to be Jerusalem in their case, but in your case, it might be a resort in Little Rock, Arkansas. I don't know. But you're going to go to the place that I'm going to show you, and you take your whole household with you. And if you've made so much during the year that you can't take a tithe with you, you can turn it into silver or gold. And when you get there, you can buy whatever you want. You can buy food, you can buy lamb, you can buy curry, you can buy whatever you want, and beer, fermented drinks, whatever you want. The Bible says this, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a celebration before the Lord, thanking him for his goodness to the business. That's what you do. It says it in Deuteronomy chapter 14. But on the third year, you don't go to Little Rock. The third year, you've got to stay in Dallas, Fort Worth, or wherever you're from. And you have your party back home, and you invite the homeless, the poor, the widows, the refugee, the immigrants, and your pastor, right? So you
Right.
invite them. So if you imagine, as I see it, say there's 300 companies owned by Christians in your town, or 150 of them. Every week, somebody will be having a block party and inviting everybody. It's going to deal with all sorts of social issues. It's going to
Transformation.
address the needs of people. And then people are
Yeah.
not going to go 10 miles up the freeway to the big box store. They're going to spend there. They're going to buy there, because every week if there's 150 companies, roughly every week, there's 3 of those guys are having a big party saying, yes, 10% of our profits. Come one, come all. We're going to have spare ribs. We're going to have baked potatoes. We're going to have all that kind of stuff. Whatever you have in Texas, whatever you have in your location.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there's the freedom in scripture to actually invest in your people. God expects it. And then people will have a more positive view of business. One of the big issues we have among young people nowadays, the Gen Zs and the new gen people, is business
Gen
is
Alpha.
bad, business is ripping you off. Well, if you've got the businesses saying, hey, you all come now down to McDonald's or whatever it's going to be, we're buying up the day's worth of food for people, or we're going to do this, or we're going to have that, or we're going to have a
You
sports,
know,
whatever. There
you
would
know
be a
what?
completely different feeling about business.
I honestly like I look up as crazy as I'm about to say it, I really look up to the Gen Zs. You know why?
Right.
Because they're teaching the church that you should bring your values to work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they are very much they want to be value aligned.
Yeah.
And we've separated that in the marketplace in the church. We've
Right.
said, and so what we're seeing now is this more of a value aligned, you know, movement that's happening now,
Yeah.
and seeing how the Holy Spirit can touch people's lives through that. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. There is I wrote a book called Repurposing People, because a CEO asked me, Brett, do you have an assessment to figure out whether the person I'm working with is a kingdom person? And so the book is written from 2 perspectives. A Gen Z or a new gen person, how do you prepare to go into an interview, into a job, and so on? And I cover through an A through Z of things that they can do. But they have the similar problem. Every company says, oh, yeah, we're purpose driven, we're ESG, we care about the environment, we want to do good for the world, we want to make a better planet, we want to give you a better work life balance. They say it, but do they do it? And the new gen people, the Gen Z, they can sniff it out if it's not real, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So there's actually no place to hide. You can't be faking it like, oh, yeah, my business is my household, and then not live it out practically because they'll call you out, right?
I think the title of Dan's book, Dan
Yeah.
Authentic Leadership, you
Yeah.
know, and you gotta, in order to do this, you have to have a heart for it.
I'll just add one thing to that authenticity piece is, one of the biblical requirements for leadership is that a leader must be hospitable. You
Yes,
got to practice hospitality. And so if you have a leader who's not practicing hospitality, they shouldn't be a leader. Basically, in fact, my contention is if you went through the pulpits across America and you fired every pulpit minister who hadn't had somebody around for a meal in their home in the last quarter, let alone a month, a lot of people would be out of a job. But it is a biblical requirement. And what I find with this household thing is you have to practice hospitality.
yes,
I spoke to one guy in Silicon Valley, and he and his wife ran a business, and I spoke to him. You've got to be a father to your people, and you have they've got to see how you live life. He's like, I don't want them to know my address, and but the household thing really requires a practicing of hospitality in whatever format that looks like, whether you're doing it on premises, at
that's right.
retreats, in homes, and so forth. Because when you're hospitable, you get to see the real deal. I mean, you
Well,
can have, yeah,
I was gonna say, I just pray that the marketplace leaders that are watching this, that God would begin to show them, and give them a heart for this, because I don't want more to do,
yeah,
I want less to do, but I want
right,
to do less really well.
yeah, yeah,
And I want to give, and I don't think the Lord's asking us to do a million things. You
no,
know, one could put 1,000 to flight, two could put 10,000 to flight. The
yeah,
idea of efficiency and with the Holy Spirit, that's the heart of it. You got to get your heart in a position where you understand, like, wow, you are in a sacred position.
right,
You have, you are in a very unique position that you have to decide whether or not you want to be in that unique position because God's calling you.
right.
So, anyways, it's been good.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, Shadi, I'm glad that you unpacked the story. I'd forgotten some of the details of our interaction at the table over there.
That was good, right? What about the
Yeah,
one you stabbed me in the heart? Yes, that was good.
yeah, that's good. Yeah. But rest assured, you're not the first guy I've stabbed in the heart that way. And in the book Households, I actually start with the story of a friend, Dominic, who was the first guy I had this conversation with back in South Africa. And he and I caught, and this was 20 years ago, and he and I caught up recently and checked in on his household and what it looks like for him and so forth. And he had a big sphere of influence when I met him, similar to you, and it's grown probably fivefold since then,
Wow.
which is wonderful. And with the key thing, this is I love your point that this isn't another thing on your to-do list. This is a truth, a biblical truth. In the scripture, as I said, about 132 times it mentions household, depending on translation, and you have these multiple incidences of
Yeah.
whole households coming into faith, coming to know God, the kingdom coming to whole households,
Yeah.
which I unpack in the book. But what it does is it actually frees you up, this understanding. It's not another thing on your to-do list. It actually causes the things that are on your plate to gel better. And so, Shadi, thanks for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I have so much to thank for you, man. And you've really, you really impacted the trajectory of my life, really. And I'm
Mm.
very thankful for you and Lynn. And you guys are amazing. So thank you for having me on, eh?
Shadi, you are most welcome. Hey, that's the first A you had said that is the only
No,
way I
you
knew
got
you were
you got it.
Canadian.
I didn't say y'all yet. So
Y'all, yeah. Hey,
y'all come back now. Yeah. So it's just I just this whole households thing, I want to shout about it on the rooftops, to be
Yeah,
honest with you, because
yeah.
this is a very important thing. And so just thank you for having me on and allowing me to share my story.
You're welcome. And it's good to have a piece of your story in the book. I'll keep adding to it for future editions. And so that's good. Maybe we'll make it, maybe you'll make it Christmas gifts for your staff this year to read about households. If you want to let the secret out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I'm really excited about?
Yeah.
The t-shirt you're gonna send.
The t-shirt. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just kidding.
Yeah. It has households in it, not households, households.
Households.
That's the
That's
story.
funny.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Great.
Brett.
Shadi, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time and appreciate all you're doing in the marketplace.
Appreciate you.
And we're looking forward to your next visit out here to Paradise Meadows.
We'll be there this year, 2024. It's gonna happen.
Great. Great.
All right. See you, Brett.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Okay.